The humid Hawaiian night was alive with the sound of rustling leaves and the faint crash of waves against the distant shore. High in the hills, where the moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy of the trees, the jungle felt ancient, untouched by time. A lone hiker, a newcomer to the island, followed a narrow trail that he had been warned not to take after dark. The air grew heavy, the usual chorus of crickets and frogs falling silent. The hiker stopped, his flashlight cutting through the dense foliage, but the beam seemed weaker now, as if darkness had thickened. A faint drum beat echoed through the night, steady and rhythmic, growing louder with every second. The hiker's heart raced as the sound drew closer. He felt a strange pull to the side of the trail, where the trees opened to reveal a wide, ancient path, glowing faintly under the moon's watchful eye. Mist swirled along the ground, and suddenly they appeared, figures moving in perfect formation. Barely visible, they were clad in traditional Hawaiian garments, their bodies illuminated by otherworldly glow. Each step was purposeful, their expressions solemn. Torches burned in their hand, casting flickering lights that danced across their faces. The hiker's instinct screamed at him to move, to flee, but his body refused to obey. He dropped to his knees, lowering his eyes to the ground, a primal fear overtaking him. He had heard the legends of the night marchers, ancient warriors bound to the land, destined to roam sacred paths, punishing those who dared to cross their way. The procession passed, the drum beats fading into the distance. When the hiker finally dared to look up, the path was empty, the jungle once again alive in its nighttime symphony. He scrambled back to the trail and ran, vowing never to return. The wind swept through the barren landscape of massacre rocks, carrying with it a deep, biting chill. The Snake River shimmered under the moonlight, its surface deceptively calm. For Alex, the overnight camping trip was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a chance to disconnect and find solace in nature. He'd heard of the legends surrounding the area, whispers of tragic history and restless spirits, but he dismissed them as local folklore. The only sounds were the gentle crackle of the flames and the occasional rustle of leaves. But as the hours stretched into night, an unnatural stillness settled over the area. The river, once soothing, now seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Alex noticed faint splashes breaking the surface, though no fish or animals were in sight. Then came a sound, a soft, distant wailing. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the cries grew louder, more distinct. They sounded like a baby, high-pitched and desperate, carried across the water. A cold dread crept into Alex's chest. He turned his flashlight towards the river, its beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, the light reflected off the surface, revealing ripples that seemed to move against the current. Then he saw it, a small figure, barely visible, slipping just beneath the water. He froze, unable to tear his eyes away. The cries intensified, echoing around him as if coming from every direction. He scrambled to his feet, heart pounding, as the fire suddenly sputtered out. The air felt heavier, oppressive, and Alex swore he saw movement in his peripheral vision. Tiny, pale hands reaching towards the shore. Panic overtook him. Grabbing only his car keys, Alex bolted up the path towards his vehicle, the cries still ringing in his ears. As he drove away, the sound faded, leaving only the roar of his engine and the pounding of his heart. Days later, Alex learned the stories of the water babies, spirits tied to the river by a history of loss and despair. He hadn't believed in such things before, but that night at Massacre Rocks left him questioning everything. Something was out there, something he'd felt, seen, and heard, and it wasn't just a legend. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the abandoned gravestones of Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. Hidden deep within the forest near Chicago, the small, overgrown burial ground was a place shrouded in mystery and tales of ghostly apparitions. Its crumbling headstones leaned at odd angles, some swallowed by the earth, while at the pond the edge of grounds glistened with an unnatural stillness. Eric and his friends had come to the cemetery on a dare, armed with flashlights and a sense of bravado. The stories of vanishing figures, phantom lights, and eerie sounds were just that to them, stories. As the last light faded, the group explored the cemetery, their laughter echoing against the silence. But the air changed suddenly, growing thick and oppressive. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and even the chirping of crickets fell silent. Eric felt a shift before he saw anything, a prickle at the back of his neck that made him pause. Turning towards the pond, his flashlight illuminated a figure in white, standing near the water's edge. The figure was a woman, pale and translucent, her gown flowing as though caught in a gentle breeze. She stood motionless, her face turned away from him, staring into the still water. Eric's breath caught in his throat, his flashlight trembling in his hands. He called to his friends, but the words stuck, unspoken. The woman began to move, gliding towards the pond, her form wavering like a reflection in rippling water. The beam of his flashlight passed through her, as though she wasn't there. Then, with a final step, she vanished, dissolving into thin air. Eric's friends ran to him, their faces pale, having seen the same thing from the other side of the cemetery. The oppressive silence lifted, replaced by the distant hum of night sounds returning. The group fled without a word, leaving the cemetery behind. Eric never returned to Bachelor's Grove, but the image of the woman by the pond haunted his dreams. The legend wasn't just a story, it was real, and he had seen it with his own eyes. Under the pale glow of the moon, the 100-step cemetery in Indiana loomed like a dark shadow against the rolling hills. The worn stone steps, cracked and uneven with age, climbed sharply up to a hill to the old burial ground at the top. Legend had it that anyone who climbed the steps at midnight would meet the ghostly keeper of the cemetery, who would reveal the moment of their death. Caroline had heard the stories before, but dismissed them as superstition. That night, she stood at the bottom of the steps, flashlight in hand, curiosity outweighing her fear. The air was cold, far colder than the crisp fall evening should have been. She took a deep breath and placed her foot on the first step. The woods surrounding her were unnaturally quiet as she climbed, counting each step aloud in her head. The numbers came easy at first, but with every step, the air grew heavier, pressing down on her chest. At the 50th step, her flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in near total darkness. She hesitated, but forced herself to continue, feeling the way with her trembling hands. By the 100th step, she reached the top. A faint mist clung to the ground, and the gravestones seemed to lean in towards her, their shapes blurred and shifting. Caroline's pulse quickened as she scanned the area. For a moment, she thought she was alone. Then she saw him. A shadowy figure emerged from the mist, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by darkness. He raised an arm, bony and skeletal, and pointed directly at her. Her breath caught as her vision blurred, the image of her own death flashing in her mind. Panicked, she turned and ran down the steps, counting again in her head, desperate to break the spell. But when she reached the bottom, she counted only 99 steps. Confused and terrified, she fled to her car, vowing never to return. Caroline never told anyone what she had seen at the top, but the experience stayed with her. The legend of the 100-step cemetery was no mere tale. She had faced its truth, and it had marked her forever. The Villisca Axe Murder House stood in eerie silence, its modest frame illuminated by the pale moonlight. The house, frozen in time since that brutal June night in 1912, drew visitors from across the country, daring to confront its haunted history. Tonight, it was Chris's turn, a skeptic lured by curiosity. The house creaked with every step as he moved through its darkened halls. The air was thick, carrying the faint scent of wood and something metallic, as if the violence of that long-ago night had seeped into its bones. Chris's flashlight scanned the walls, revealing the preserved furnishings of a family home that once buzzed with life. He entered the children's bedroom, where tiny beds stood side by side. The room was still, unnaturally so. A faint scratching sound came from the far corner, but there was nothing there. As Chris stepped further in, the temperature dropped sharply, chilling him to the core. The flashlight flickered and then died, plunging him into darkness. His breath quickened as faint footsteps echoed above him, moving slowly across the attic floor. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, as though descending the attic stairs towards him. Chris stood there frozen, unable to move. He felt a presence, something unseen yet suffocatingly close. The air around him vibrated with energy, and a faint whisper, distinct but chilling, brushed against his ears. Suddenly, the door in the room creaked shut with deliberate slowness. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, he saw a shadow pass by, a figure moving unnaturally, as if gliding rather than walking. It stopped at the doorway, its outline barely human, and lingered for what felt like an eternity. Then it vanished. The house fell silent once more, but Chris didn't stay to see what might happen next. He bolted from the room, his footsteps pounding down the stairs and out the front door. Chris never doubted the stories again. The Villisca axe murder house wasn't just haunted by history, it was alive with it, and its ghosts weren't content to remain in the past.